Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to some more Warpforge coverage. And today I'm finally bringing the keywords kind of like deep dive video. And it seems like people have been liking this, whether it's just going over the rarities and card evaluation and stuff like that. I know there were, I think, a couple folks who asked for, hey, can you go through the keywords? Probably not only just explaining them, but as you know me here on the channel, if you've been sticking with me, I try to give a little bit of context and explanation for these keywords so that you're not just looking at this and reading it with me and being like, okay, that's what that does, but really thinking about, okay, is that worth it? Does that make that card better or worse? If this thing got buffed or changed, like, would that make, this or that card even more viable? Because we really want to be sort of critically thinking about, why am I using this strategy? Why do I care about these keywords? The way we're going to do this video is we're going to go with kind of a general view, explain what Ephemeral is and give my take on that. And I think that's actually pretty relevant for people who have been starting this game and figuring out how to play it. And there are definitely some differences, I feel like, with most, TCGs or CCGs. We're going to go just by faction and go through what their kind of signature keywords are. And then alphabetically, I'm going to go through all what I would describe as like the general keywords. And we're even going to make a pit stop to talk about card type, because although that may not be terribly relevant now, I'm sure at some point it will be. It's usually, not a good thing to overlook card types, because at some point there's some card that comes along. And there are obviously some that name card types and why they're relevant in this game. But it's something that I don't know that everyone's thinking about, and I figured I'd throw that in there as well. And before we get started, thank you all for the support and the love on the channel, the subscribes, the likes, the comments. It seems like this game is something that everyone's really getting into, and whether you're enjoying it, struggling it, I'm here for you. I just hope that these videos are helpful, and that it's adding something to your experience, and it certainly helps me become, I think, a better player, as I've just been collecting more Ultramarines, and now I'm on to Aeldari. And don't worry, I'll be getting more videos to y'all about deck guides and gameplay, and drafting as well, because that is a big thing for me. So without further ado, let's kick it off. And I figured I'd just use, at the top here to go over Ephemeral. And since Uriel is the starter for Ultramarines, I bet a lot of people have been playing with this card and kind of figuring out, or rather this warlord, figuring out how good is he. And I think we can safely say he's probably the weakest of the three for the Ultramarines. I don't think there's a lot to contest about that, but you can certainly build a great aggro deck, and there is something to be said for warlords that can clear 3 health units. That's a really relevant number and relevant stat line, and it means that you actually have a better matchup into certain matchups, whether that be against Aeldari with Spirit Stones, and we'll talk about that, whether it's against anything that's just generally going wide, or against Necrons that have Remnant, we'll talk about that. So, don't overlook the starter guys. They've got something to do. But just to use as an example, Master of the Fleet is an ephemeral card. Every warlord gets an ephemeral card at the beginning of your turn. Ephemeral just quite literally means like it comes and it goes, right? So you get access to this card every single turn. Why do we want to talk about this for a second? Because it's not always clear to me, or at least when I started this game, and it's a little bit clearer now, of how often you're supposed to be using this, right? Or like sort of a rule of thumb to follow. The rule of thumb that I received from some really great players like Doles, and I think there are probably plenty of others who have talked about this with me too, when I was looking for feedback in the alpha. It's that you kind of want to use this card every turn if you can. The reason why, obviously you don't want to sacrifice a potential tempo or curve out, and that's where it gets a little tricky to evaluate. But essentially this is draw a card every turn, right? And you can use that card pretty much every turn unless you have certain conditions on your warlord, right? But for Master of the Fleet, you can straight up just spam this every single turn. That is card advantage, right? You're not expending a resource because every turn you're getting this card. So don't discount ephemeral cards. I would start even thinking about shifting up your curve a little bit and basically saying, all right, I'm going to do this turns 2, 3, 4, 5 potentially. right? And then maybe I'll throw in some 2-drops and 3-drops, but maybe I just know that basically I'm bumping up when I'm going to play a card so that I can play Master of the Fleet every single turn. That's just my little sort of tip about ephemeral cards and warlords, and it is technically a keyword. So it just means that every single turn, when you start your turn, you're going to get this in your hand. Now that matters also for hand size, right, which I believe is 10. So if you start your turn at 9, you'll draw for turn, you'll hit full on 10, and then you won't gain access to your ephemeral card. So just make sure, if you're getting your hand kind of clogged up, I would start really paying attention after 7, because maybe you need access to your ephemeral warlord ability. So make sure that you're not just kind of throwing away games when you're not really thinking about that. So that is where we're going to start with ephemeral, and now we're just going to go faction by faction and go through what are, I would call, like, their faction specific keywords, but also probably keywords, and there are a couple here we'll go over that I'm guessing will expand outside of the faction, and we can talk about that. So first and foremost, and one of the easiest ones, and I'm just going to have this here so we can kind of get a full picture of which cards have this: Codex, right? So this is the Space Marines jam. Whether you're running a Codex that is deal 1 to 2 damage to all enemies, which is quite powerful, or even on the lower end, something like Stern Guard Sergeant, which is deal 2 damage to a random enemy, which is definitely solid, but not going to win the game by itself. What does Codex do? Codex is quite literally does something when you use up all your energy. The reason I think Ultramarines tends to be a little bit more of the poster child of the game, and design-wise that kind of made it that way, is like Codex essentially rewards you for curving out and using your energy every single turn. Generally, in card games, that's what you want to do, right? There are, of course, cases where you're going to be a little, what I would call, mana inefficient, right, coming from Magic the Gathering background. But essentially, you want to be using all of your resources every turn, right? Because you're essentially getting your most bang for the biggest buck. That is what Ultramarines is rewarding you for doing. That means you want to make sure you have a decent distribution or ability to have odd and even number cards, right? Because you're going to be on odd and even number energy turns. And Codex just means that you should really think about, especially if you've got a decent payoff, whereas, like, let's say Blade Guard Veteran, not a huge payoff, especially when it comes into play. But later on, let's say you're like, okay, on turn 7, I want to play a 4-drop and a 3-drop to use all 7 of my energy to heal my Blade Guard Veteran after he attacks, right? So Codex just means as soon as you use all of your energy, that trigger happens, right? And the reason, let me just snag Tactical Insight. Well, the reason why this card is good is you can trigger Codex twice, because you go down to 0 energy, Codex triggers, you play this card, it puts 2 energy back, you use that 2 energy, right? And then Codex re-triggers again. It's the only way in the game to re-trigger Codex. That's why Tactical Insight is probably a staple in every list. I actually overlooked it quite a bit coming into my original card evaluations, but I actually think it just does pretty much what you want to do, especially when you're running all of the very powerful Codex Space Marines here. So that is it for the Ultramarines. That is their only specific keyword that they have, and I think every other faction, I just have my phone to give me some notes here, has multiple. So that's kind of interesting. And when we think about, like, balance and stuff like that, clearly Codex is still, like, putting up some really great numbers because it's the only kind of specific thing to the faction that's doing pretty well, and it rewards you for what I would say is, like, quote unquote ideal gameplay, curving out, using all your resources, getting rewarded for it. So let's move right along to the Orks, which have some interesting ones. So the first one is Mob. Now, we're going to go over what Strike is later in the video. Mob essentially is Strike, but specific to the Orks, right? So Mob is a keyword that says trigger an effect after another friendly unit does a melee attack. So that's important. And I'll read over Strike. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, it might be melee and range, but I'll take a look. So Mob is very on brand, of course, for the Orks, for just getting in and rumbling and damaging your opponent and getting rewarded for it. It's just really important here that you notice it's another friendly unit, right? So it does not trigger by itself. It has to be triggered by something else, which means before you're going to play your Shooter Boy here, which is an excellent Ork card, you're going to want to set it up, right? You're going to want to have a couple units down, so maybe they clear one unit, but you've got another one. You play your Shooter Boy, you attack, trigger mob, get your value up front, right? So you just want to make sure when you're playing with Orks that you're sequencing the mob out correctly so that you're really taking advantage of, essentially, as soon as you play it, it's getting value. And as you might have heard me in other videos, that is very, very important to being on top and playing the best strategies, is getting value right up front, because your units are not long for this world, just like everything in the Warhammer 40k universe. So we've got a mob that is pretty great. Deal 1 damage to a random enemy. There's a lot of ways to go wide with Ork, to something so big as the Battle Wagon, where mob lower the cost of a random infantry in your hand by 2, which in the late game, if you've got some gas, no pun intended here, in your hand, then maybe this pays off. But I think some of the best mob abilities are ones that you can enable earlier in the game. Even Death Dread actually can be quite scary. If you've got, your Warlord can melee attack. If you've got 1 or 2 extra units, dealing 1 to 3 damage to a random enemy as soon as you play this is not bad. So the Orks be mobbing. They'll probably always be mobbing. Can't really stop that. And then we've actually got access to the next keyword that is really important here, which is going to be unstable. And this is a very interesting keyword for a number of reasons. So unstable. When this unit dies, it deals 0 to 3 damage to adjacent units. Adjacent meaning to the left of it and to the right of it, right? The other ones on the outside, they're not going to get hit by that. But the ones that are essentially in the inner circle of 1 to the left, 1 to the right, they're going to get hit with a certain amount of damage. Unstable essentially is a way of, like, again, being very on brand for the Orks, where they're just building these things and hoping they work, right? But there's sort of a drawback. So looking at Grot Tank, who I think is a good example, 3 energy, 3/3, 3 health, but it's got 1 armor. We'll talk about how powerful armor can be. But it's also gated by unstable, meaning, yes, it's a harder unit to clear, but once you clear it, if your opponent's not paying attention to how they're positioning their own Orks, it's going to backfire, right? So that is an important keyword to pay attention to, because maybe your opponent just is like kind of throwing stuff out on the board and not really noticing, how their positioning is, and maybe you can really get an advantage from blowing up a tank and being able to get some spray damage on some other units that allows you to get a little bit further ahead in the game. So unstable is a bit of a liability, and you do want to be really careful with how you're utilizing those units, because it really can come back to bite you. And I did look this up, which I think is so funny, because I sort of pulled this out of my mind. So the only instance of fast in the game is on Warbiker. I actually thought it was on other cards, but I was looking it up today, and I assume this is a keyword that we're gonna see in the future. And honestly, maybe I didn't search correctly, but I looked at all the flank units, and this is the only instance of fast. Fast means you can attack any unit, and we'll go over that in a little bit after I get through these initial keywords. So flank means you can attack an enemy troop. Flank fast means you can attack an enemy warlord. That's the difference, right? I'm sure we're going to see more fast stuff in the future, but the Warbiker for the Goth clan is actually the only instance that I've seen of that. And if I even try to search by fast, right, this is the only one that comes up. So really interesting. That, I mean, it makes sense that it would be an Ork card, but it's funny that we only have one instance of it so far. And then the last one is also technically an Ork specific one, because there are only 2 cards that have it, which is Backlash, meaning trigger an effect when this unit dies. So think, but when this dies, does something, right? That's what Backlash is. So again, you just want to think about what that means, right? Like often if Bomb Swig gets put on the board, I'm going to kill this thing first to see where the damage goes, because it has unstable, right? And it also has deal 2 to 3 damage to all enemies, right? So I want to be really careful of killing this first, then playing my cards. So these are the only 2 cards with Backlash, Makari and Bomb Squig. Definitely some pretty great staples coming out of the Orks. And very on brand as well, right? Like you get punished for killing them. I think that's some really, really good flavor. So moving right along to the Necrons, we're going to start with their big signature ability, which is Remnant, right? These guys are kind of like the Terminator boys, and I'm actually starting to listen to some lore podcasts and stuff, so hopefully I'll have a little bit more better sense of these cards for you guys in the future where they fit into the Warhammer 40k history. But for now, just know that these guys are coming back unless you're doing something about them, right? So Remnant means when a unit dies, it leaves behind a little remnant, right? And you'll see it on the board. It's like a little green kind of bar. Remnants are destroyed at the end of that player's turn, right? So if they attack you and their card turns into a remnant, if they just pass the turn to you, it's off the board. But it means that you essentially have to kill Necrons twice, or rather attack them twice, right? You have to clear the unit and kill it, and then you have to use your Warlord or something else, or something that does at least 1 damage to take that remnant off the board. So let's actually look at a card that recently lost, oh no, it does have remnants. Oh, I thought the patch fixed this. Maybe that hasn't happened yet. Sorry, I thought they took Remnant off of Technomancer. I could be wrong about that. But so I was going to use this as an example of when this card has Remnant, it's really, really pesky because it also reanimates other ones, right? It's reanimate meaning that they just like come back from their Remnant. Remnant is extremely powerful on very good cards. And I guess I can't really leave out probably one of the biggest headaches, which is Lichguard. Remnant, Armor, Vanguard. We'll go over those keywords obviously in a bit. Suffice it to say, this thing is incredibly tanky, even when you're poking range damage at it. And then you got to make sure it's off the board because you bet your bottom dollar that Necron player is going to try and bring this Lichguard right back up. And then you have to sink a whole potential series of attacks again to try and clear it to get to their face. So Lichguard is such a great example of the value of Remnant goes up on the card when the card has more survivability because it buys you more time. It makes your opponent sink more resources into it. So Remnant is really quite powerful. The other one, which I'm not so hot about for Necrons, is going to be Frenzy. Demonic Frenzy is coming up here. So let's take a look at Frenzy. So Frenzy, because it's Frenzied, not Frenzy. That's why. This unit attacks by itself at the start of your turn. And my understanding is that this is random. I know that some players have said, like, depending on the board state, it operates a certain way. I'm going to be honest. I wish I knew for sure that that's how it works, but I really don't. And maybe that was like coding earlier in the alpha. I don't know if that's changed at all. But essentially, you're going to get probably a bunch of stats and a bunch of upgrade, something to make this card worth it. But the reason that it's not good is because of Frenzied, meaning you can't control where it's attacking, right? So obviously you get a little bit rewarded here if you can clear your opponent's units so that really this thing only has a choice between, a Warlord and a Warlord, right? It's going to hit them for 8. Generally, I would not recommend Frenzied units because again, you can't really control what they're doing. However, there are 2 caveats. I think Scorptech Destroyer, because up front, it's going to clear a unit, right? And then probably die, whatever, that's fine. You got your attack to get in there. It's still going to clear a unit, and that's totally fine. An Amphibian Destroyer, this card can actually be quite annoying when it has 4 health and it gets to maybe make 2 attacks. You're getting your money's worth for this, right? Giving it stealth. I think pretty much every other Frenzy card is probably not what you want to be doing, just as an aside. But it's interesting. It basically, kind of, I guess, fits in line with the Necrons of, like, they're just going in once they're back from the dead kind of thing. So, yeah, so those are going to be our only instances of Frenzy that come up for the Necrons. Moving right along, and no surprise, nearly every Chaos card has Dark Pact on it, right? So what is Dark Pact? It is give a blessing. There are 4 from one of the 4 Chaos gods. Of course, very on brand for all of Chaos. Now you're going to get 4 options. You're going to get one that gives +2 range, +2 attack, right, melee. You're going to get what used to, I think, be the Pact of Nurgle, but I think it's now Pact of Resilience, is +1 health, +1 regeneration. We'll talk about what regeneration means. There is +2 health and camouflage, and then there is +2 melee and vanguard. So essentially, dark packs are just giving keywords and some level of stats to your units. Obviously, very on brand for the Chaos and all that they do, which is, blessing their folks who are, giving blood to the blood god with corn and all of that stuff, or Nurgle and infecting people with disease and all that crazy stuff. So that is going to be obviously the kind of poster sign of, like, you're playing Chaos. You've got these dark packs. They used to be, what were they? They were Chaos, Marks of Chaos, I think, and then they changed it. So if you're wondering why the name might sound different, they did actually change it. So again, the 4 options is basically regeneration and health and camouflage, vanguard and a bit of melee, or melee and ranged attack. So it's definitely good for you to familiarize yourself on, like, how crazy some of these units can get. So that is the Black Legion and the Chaos Marines. Moving right along to the Aeldari, and probably one of the big ones that you see on most cards is this keyword Waystone. Right, and actually, Howling Banshee has a million keywords on it. But so what does Waystone do? Similar to Necrons, when you kill a unit that has this keyword, there's going to be something left behind, and that is a Spirit Stone. Now, Spirit Stones are essentially a currency that only Eldar have access to utilize to buff their abilities, right? So this is kind of like 2 keywords at the same time. There's Waystone, and then there's a Spirit Stone ability. So when you kill their Howling Banshee, which I'm sure has done some damage, and unfortunately, it is going to leave a Waystone behind, and you have to use an attack or deal 1 damage to get rid of that Spirit Stone, or else it's going to be collected by that player that turn or the following turn, right? Now, what are Spirit Stones used for? They are used for this ability. So it says, if Spirit Stones are consumed by some Aeldari cards to trigger additional effects, right? So if you were paying 5 for a 5/5 with 5 health, right, that would be pretty lackluster, because there are plenty of cards that have other keywords. Let's just even go to the Medic coming out of the Ultramarines, right? It's got Codex with all these stats, and meaning it's going to heal your troops. So what does Spirit Seer do? When you have 2 Waystones, it's also going to summon a Wraith Guard, which is essentially you're getting a 2/3 with 4 health with Vanguard. Unfortunately, the Spirit Stone does not see this trigger again when it comes into play, as far as I know. I believe that's confirmed. You would actually have to separately play the Spirit Guard, because essentially it only sees this one trigger of, do you have the Spirit Stones to spend? So there are plenty of cards that have Waystone, and then there are plenty of cards that have an ability that you can access, and they're all different, to use this currency of the Spirit Stones. And then the last ability, which is one that I'm sure a lot of people can be quite annoyed by, and it really does change the combat math so much. And let's just go with Striking Scorpion, because this card is scary as hell. Shuriken. When attacking, it deals X amount of damage to the target before an attack is resolved. Why does this matter? Because in this game, there's retaliation damage, right? You're hitting them for 4, they hit you back for 4. So Shuriken breaks that parity, right? And means that the damage happens first, then the attack goes through. So there's no retaliation damage when something does Shuriken. So this guy that is pretty scary, the Striking Scorpion X-Arch, what he's going to do is deal 4 damage up front before he's even hit you, essentially. Then he's going to deal another 4, another 2. Right? So what this means is this deals a total of 8 damage to a Warlord, or a total of 8 melee damage to a unit, or a total of 6 range damage to a unit. The fact that this can clear 4 health targets without ever trading is scary as hell. So Shuriken is one of those things that can really snowball. It makes Viper a playable card. 1, 3, 4 health, 4 energy, flying. You would not put this in your deck. But the fact that it's got Shuriken 3, meaning it can attack for a ranged 6 damage for 4 energy, and the fact that Shuriken 3 means it can clear any 3 health unit without taking damage back makes it worthwhile. So Shuriken and flank are obviously going to go really well hand in hand because you flank them into play, and we'll talk about that keyword later. And then they're going to hit that thing, and they're going to apply their Shuriken, and you're going to clear their units very, very effectively. So Shuriken can be quite scary, and there's a legendary card, even that Dance of Death, that gives something permanently Shuriken 2. So it's always having +2. You're going to use this on your Warlord. You probably wouldn't use this on a unit because your Warlord is permanently getting this buff. So Shuriken, they'd be pretty scary coming out of the Eldar. And when I learn more about the Eldar, I guess I'll learn why Shuriken is there. But feel free to leave a comment, and please educate me if you feel like it. So, last but never least, we've got the Tyranids. So we got to start with Swarm, right? Okay, what does Swarm do? When played on the left side of a troop, that's very important, because when you play it on the right side, it's not going to trigger. When you play this on the left side of the troop with the same name, obviously things are going to have tied. Tied basically makes a copy of the card. We'll go over that later. It is combined with it, adding its stats. So what does that mean? When I play a Von Ryan's Leaper on turn, when I have 8 energy and I swarm it, putting another one into it, that means it's literally just adding its stats. It's going to have 10 attack, 8 health, 0 range because it doesn't have a range attack. So that's what Swarm does. It's pretty scary because if someone establishes a card with Swarm and you do not clear it, and Von Ryan's Leaper has stealth, which means it's going to be hard to target it, they could just drop 1 or 2 more right on top of it. It melds in, and essentially those things have fast, because then you're adding those stats, and they immediately, you're able to attack with that Von Ryan's Leaper for 10 or 15, right? Which is nothing to sneeze at. That is pretty terrifying, which, is sort of the Tyranids thing. So that's what Swarm is going to do. It's going to reward you for letting a unit live or be able to play extra copies of that unit. And no, Scarab Swarm does not have Swarm. It just has it in the title. And then one of my favorite keywords, which I can't spell today, Synapse. And Broodlord is probably the scariest example of this. Synapse, what does that mean? When this unit is targeted by a friendly stratagem, keyword, right? Not your opponent's abilities. That would definitely make Synapse quite a bit worse. Adjacent units, one to the left, one to the right, are affected by that stratagem as well. So when you're giving your Tyranids health, attack, armor, whatever it is, right, and you target a Synapse unit, that means that it is going to get that ability itself, and then it's going to propagate, spread out to the left and the right unit. And actually on Broodlord, it synapses twice, which is really filthy. This guy is just spreading around all these buffs, and it's pretty terrifying. So again, very on brand for the Tyranids, right? Like, they're all a hive mind. They share, this crazy like alien intelligence and all of that stuff. So it gets pretty scary pretty fast. And there are many, many cheap ways for Tyranids to enable Synapse to just get way out of hand. So that makes a lot of sense for them. And kind of not unlike fast for the Orks, there is actually a keyword, Bloodthirst, which is only on 1 card in the game. And very simply, you can attack twice per turn, right? So the Ravenous Hunter, the Hive Fleet Leviathan card, give Bloodthirst and +1 melee attack to an off-friendly unit this turn. Obviously, this card gets really scary on Synapse, giving potentially up to 3 units ability to attack twice per turn +1 melee attack. I haven't really seen a build with this quite yet. I'm sure there are some people who are probably gunning for it, but this seems really crazy. And I imagine we will see Bloodthirst outside of Tyranid just as much as I think we're going to see fast outside of Orks. I don't really feel like their identity is tied to those keywords, but it's kind of nice that we actually get a little bit of a preview through this first set of cards. Some keywords that are going to come up later that maybe have a bit more power, and they just kind of want to test out and see how that goes. So while we're sort of on the subject with this card, I want to shift gears for a second and talk about card typing, right? So there's a difference between unit, between troop, between infantry, between vehicle. right? So the quick way of thinking about this is when something says enemy, that is everything. When something says unit, that is everything, right? And by everything I mean it's a troop on the battlefield or it's the warlord. Unit includes that as well. But when it says enemy troop, that does not include warlord. Unit includes warlord, right? And let me just actually see if I type unit, what will come up. Right. So this is going to say destroy any troop attacked by this unit, right? So there's always kind of like a little bit of a modifier. This says give +3 friendly to a unit, +3 health to a friendly unit. So if you use this on Synapse and your warlord is next to that card, your warlord is going to get +3 health because that unit includes your warlord. So I just want to make that distinction. And then there's infantry versus vehicle. I believe it's Tomb World, which I opened last night out of a random RB pack. It was so cool. This says friendly infantry, right? So vehicle. My goodness, my typing is just... Okay. So what that means is if Triarch Stalker dies and you try to Tomb World it back, it's not coming back. This is a vehicle. It is not an infantry. But there are plenty of infantry. Even this Vargard Oberon, who would be scary to see again. He is an infantry. So these card types are definitely, I'm sure they're going to matter a little bit more than some of these few examples I'm showing you. And so that's kind of why I just want you to pay attention to what that means. There's also stratagem as well, right? I guess this is just saying in terms of that. So let's just inspire retribution, which is probably one of my favorite. It doesn't say it, but this is a stratagem. So something that is a spell that is not a unit, that is not a troop, is a stratagem. And some of them will say, they interact with it, like Venom Crawler, which is pretty nice because you're going to have some dark packs that cost 1 less because those are all stratagems. So just some card type stuff. I just want to make sure that everyone's very clear on. And please, again, as always, at me in the comments and let me know if anything didn't make sense. Okay. We're sort of in halfway home stretch, I guess. Let's go through all the rest of the general keywords. Oh, God. Again, I can't spell. Okay. First and foremost, armor. We're going to go alphabetically. Obviously, I have all the time codes. Damage received is reduced by X to a minimum of 1. What that means is that when you're attacking this unit, it's always going to take at least 1 damage, but overall it will be reduced by 1 because this is armor 1. So if I'm attacking this thing with 2 attack, it's only hitting for 1. If I'm attacking with 3, it's only hitting for 2, and so on and so forth. That's why things like armor 2 are just obviously strictly better and tankier and harder to kill because it's taking these higher level of attacks and really reducing them, right? So if you're attacking for 3, actually you're attacking for 1. If you're attacking for 5, actually you're only attacking for 3, right? So armor is a keyword that you should be paying attention to, obviously for combat math, right? That's really important. But you should also see a card like Hardened Biology and be like, 3 energy, I can give my guy with Synapse armor 2, and I guess I can give my other friendly troops that armor 2. Yes, armor 2 is a scary stat line, especially with something that has high attack stats, because it's going to be harder to kill and clear. So that is armor. I don't want to give too many examples because we'll be here all day going through all of them. Artifice exists in, as we can see, mostly Necrons, but also can't leave out a couple Chaos and some lovely Tyranids here. So let's go with Sporocyst, one of my favorite Tyranids as well. So it's got Synapse, but it's also got Artifice. What does Artifice mean? This does something or triggers, right? If you're coming from that, if you played any Magic like myself, when you play a stratagem, right? All Artifice means is like when you play a stratagem, when you play a spell, essentially, right? It's going to do something. So in this case, this just says deploy a Spore Mine, which means that the Spore Mine comes into play, right? If we're looking at Dark Apostle, Artifice, give a random dark pact to each friendly troop, which is a very powerful ability. Even if you got one troop, it counts itself, right? Because it's each, not other. Artifice, right? You're playing Abaddon, you put a dark pact on this, then it's going to put another dark pact on this and a dark pact on every other recruit that you have, every other unit that you've got on the battlefield. So that is what Artifice does. It just means it's triggered and goes off when you use a stratagem. All right, let's move on to the bees. We've got Blast, and sure, let's take a different. Yeah, Tesla Immortal, one of my favorite 2-drops coming out of the Necrons. Blast 2. When attacking, this deals X damage to units adjacent, right? So what this means is you can hit their Warlord for 3 in the face, and then it's going to blast out, right? Like sort of a shrapnel. Hit 2 adjacent units, 4x. This is Blast 2, which is not bad for an early card. Obviously, Blast 4, much scarier, even with the Repulsor, right? It's going to be a Blast 4 as well. So I think, this actually, Gorkanaut has Blast 5. Is that the highest? It would make sense for them to have the highest. Yeah, Blast 5. Oh, same with Hemlock Wraith Fighter, which is got to be one of the best vehicles or curve toppers for them. Blast 5. So it's going to hit something for 8 and then 5 to the adjacent units, which is absolutely massive and really affects combat and really affects your ability to maneuver the battlefield. So definitely a keyword worth keeping in mind because it has to do with positioning. Now, Blind actually comes across a few other ones, but I would say some of the biggest and, well, I don't know if scariest, but annoying ones are probably Octavio Infiltrator and the Sergeant. This blind, very clearly, a blinded unit's ranged attack becomes 0 for that turn, right? It's not permanent unless it says something like that. So blind is going to happen for that turn, and right, it's going to happen the same way for Electius, Sergeant Electius. So it's really good when you're able to get a favorable trade, right? You play an Octavio Infiltrator, blind something, then you play a flank guy that has a high ranged attack. You essentially just killed that thing for free and got to play 2 units, right? So blind is a very, very powerful ability for loads of reasons. All right, let's move on to camo. Camouflage, probably one of my least favorite keywords, but I'm starting to appreciate it a little bit more. So what does it do? This unit cannot be targeted by enemy stratagems until it attacks. So it can sit there, and as long as it's not attacking, you cannot target it with spells, is essentially what that says. If you come from a magic background, right, hexproof, shroud, you cannot target it, but you can attack it. And that's the main difference between camouflage and stealth. We'll talk about that later. Obviously, camouflage's value goes up higher the more powerful the card is that has it, right? Because being able to slam, let's even just, take Gene Stealer, for instance, and make sure that it doesn't get killed by deal 2 damage plus an attack from a Warlord. It means that it's going to be harder to kill, and then you can maybe stack it because it's got Swarm, and this thing gets really scary really quick. So camouflage does not matter, and I want to say this from the mountaintop so people don't play these cards. It does not matter on a card like Ranger. This thing has 2 health, it is going to die. Camouflage, if they tried to use a card on my 2 health card, unless it was very needed, I'd be so happy. So camouflage on a card like Ranger does absolutely nothing. So I would not play cards like this. It's going to be much better on a higher value target like Sergeant Tellian here, right? Who's going to give your card Sniper every turn. We'll talk about how powerful that is a little later. Giving it camouflage means that your opponent has strictly less ability to deal with it, get it off the board. But melee and ranged attacks, you can do. You can still target that card with combat. You just can't target it with spells. That's the big difference. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear. And then I just wanted to go over something because someone actually brought this up. This wording, choose an effect, does not mean that you get like a list of 20 effects, right? I mean, I don't think anyone thought that, but let's say something says choose a card from your deck, right? And I think this, choose a troop. Yeah, so choose a troop from your deck and draw it. This does not mean search your deck and choose a card. The choose specifically refers to 3 options. That's what it's giving you. I know a lot of other games kind of have that model where it's you choose from 3, you choose from 3. That's how it works. that is exactly how choose a blank works in this game as well, right? And then you want to pay attention. Does it say from your deck, or does it say period, right? Because armored support, which I talk a lot, although it was nerfed, this is choose an Ultramarines vehicle, period, and put it into your hand. Meaning you do not have to have these cards in your deck. This will essentially conjure or make options for you that you get to choose from, and that's why it's powerful, because it can draw cards outside of your collection, right? So that is what choose means. Just wanted to throw that in there for y'all, because I know I had some folks asking about that. We went over fast. Yeah, let's go over flank. I mean, geez, is this an important one? So, flank. Think about haste. If you're from DC Dual Force, think about speed, right? But again, this is gated a little bit, because it doesn't mean a hit your warlord's face. It means you can only hit units. So flank is only really going to matter when they have a unit already on the board. Yes, you can play a flank card ahead of turn and say, okay, I want to set this up to hit my opponent's face next turn. But obviously, flank units are meant to be a reactive card, right? So this unit can attack enemy troops the same turn it goes into play. So they've got a pesky 3-4 health unit, right? You play your Possessed Marine on turn 3, it smacks into it, takes it out, right? So it's essentially a removal spell on a body, right? And so that's why when you get even a little bit more out of trading 1-for-1 off of a flank unit, it makes them really scary. So I would say one of the scarier ones is going to be Inceptor Sergeant, 6 ranged flank. This thing easily can take out something with 4 or 5 health, right? And that has maybe 4 to 5 damage on average, and then it sticks around to hit for more. So these sorts of flank units are really, really scary. Howling Banshee is another excellent flank unit, because it's got so much going on. So flank, I'm sure if you played against Eldar and you played against Ultramarines, you know exactly what that does. Flying, it's right here actually. Let's take this Shroud Runner. Cannot be targeted with melee attacks by non-flying units. What does that mean? That means actually I can punch it in the face with my Inceptor Sergeant, because they both have flying, so I can melee attack it. But if I have something on the ground like Howling Banshee, I can't use that massive 4 attack on it. I have to use the littler 2 range damage to take out the Shroud Runner, because this card does not have flying, right? So just a good thing. And people actually, I've seen this, people mess this up a lot. I get why, because you're not generally thinking about it, but it is sometimes correct to punch with your 3 melee on another flying unit when maybe you can trade with another ranged attack, so that you don't have to sink your ranged attack into their ranged attack, which flyers tend to have higher ranged ability. So something like Inceptor Sergeant punching for 3, maybe taking 2 or 3 back, or in this case against Shroud Runner it would be 1, actually saves you quite a bit of life and sort of tempo. So you just want to think about flying v flying action, and not just keep thinking in the mindset of, oh, I can only use ranged attacks when I play a flying unit, right? So that's just kind of an important thing I would note. Invulnerable, I think, doesn't really bear too much explaining, but this unit cannot be damaged or destroyed, and it actually doesn't say it in the keyword, but it says it in the text here, to a friendly unit this turn. It does not last through another turn, right? Shield is different, and that comes from Varro, actually. He puts a shield on something, so you have to deal damage first to take the shield off. Invulnerable is only going to last the turn that you do it. So when Nadu Fireheart slams in, kills something, and lives to tell the tale, he's going to give invulnerable to 2 adjacent troops, right? And that's just a really important thing to think about, but obviously pretty self-explanatory. All right, Rally. Let's talk about that. Every game has a version of Rally, and what does Rally mean? It says trigger an effect when this unit is played from hand. So I would say if you've got any cards that you're looking at and you're like, is this good? If it's got a Rally ability, it's probably better than the average card, because Rally means that when it comes into play, do something. For DC Dual Force folks, right, that's going to be debut, right? Comes into play, does something. And then for Magic, it's just enter the battlefield triggers, right? When it enters the battlefield, it does something. So I love some of these cards, like deal 3 damage to an enemy when it comes into play. You've got getting a Dark Pact out of the Chosen. You've got Crimson Hunter that deals 3, but if it's a flying unit, it gets 6 instead, right? And then with Howling Banshee, this is actually going to stun an enemy, and we'll talk about that. It's pretty easy to divine what stun means. But that is Rally. Rally just denotes that a card is going to do something when you play it. Okay, what else? Oh, yes. Definitely a really important one here, and I'll talk about probably my favorite card with Regeneration. Regeneration X, right? At the end of each turn, heal X. And this is important, each turn, meaning your active player turn and your opponent's turn, right? So I get to hit with Goss Immortal for 3. It takes 2 from the Warlord. It heals right back up to 4 health. Then you still have to clear it on your turn. And if you only sink 2 damage into it, it's going to heal at the end of your opponent's turn, right? So Regeneration is very powerful. It means that it's going to be harder to clear the unit if you don't sink all of your resources into it right away. So don't forget that, right? It's going to heal on your active turn and your inactive turn or your opponent's turn. So Regeneration could be quite powerful, and we actually just see this on... Oh, is that really only on... Jeez, people are probably screaming earlier, being like, no, there's Regeneration for Necrons. I didn't realize that it's only a Necron ability, but that makes sense. For some reason, I thought it was somewhere else. So Necrons also have Regeneration to them. Goodness, I can't believe I missed that. Well, I can. There are so many keywords in this game. All right, Sniper. And we're going to spread this between actually 3 factions here. But let's just look at Sargentelion. Sniper. When doing a ranged attack, enemies killed don't retaliate, right? I was talking about how, Shuriken breaks this sort of parity that's already inherent in the design of the game. Sniper does that as well, right? It means that if that thing has 6 health and I'm attacking with Sargentelion for 6, it's dead. I am headshotting that thing. It is not going to retaliate against me. So giving all of your troops Sniper is pretty scary, and that's why Sargentelion would be pretty great in a more aggro or mid-range strategy. And although it's okay on Ranger, this thing's just going to die, I would say Shroud Runner is a lot more effective because it comes in and kills something, right? Flank, I can attack something immediately when it comes in, right? A unit. Let me snipe that thing, which is pretty impressive from a motorbike that's flying in the sky. Sniper, very, very scary keyword. If that thing just gets protected, right, you put that behind a Vanguard unit, you might just be losing troops left and right, which is very true to the name there. Stealth, definitely a scary keyword and one that shows up in both Eldar, Kiras, and definitely in Tyranid. Actually, we've got a stealth orc now that was added. Let's talk about Lictor, which is like a very probably a frequent one that you see. So stealth. This troop cannot be targeted for 1 turn. From everything. From attacks, from stratagems, however, it can take AoE damage, and if something says random enemy troop, actually, this is good that I'm thinking about this, it can get hit by that. So let's look up Artifice. So, yeah, Psychomancer. When this says stun a random enemy troop, this goes through stealth because it's not targeting because it says random, right? This means it's not specifically looking at that card. It just means the effect, because it can only hit that 1 troop. If that 1 troop is on the board, that Lictor is going to get stunned. So you do want to keep that in mind. Like stealth, you can work around it. Broodlord is probably one of the scary ones too. Stealth. It just means this thing sits on the board. You cannot interact with it. Next turn, then it goes off, and you're going to have to try and recover. So stealth can be really scary on obviously a high-statted unit like Von Ryan Sleeper, where your only prayer of clearing it is through AoE damage or a random artifice trigger, basically. Because otherwise, it's not going to matter. You're not going to be able to deal with it. So that's why stealth is a little bit more powerful overall than camouflage, because it also includes combat, that it can't be attacked that turn. Strike. This is essentially mob for everyone else, right? Trigger an effect after attacking if this unit survives the attack. That's really important. I'm glad they put that clause there. But strike does apply for both melee and ranged, right? Because it just says after an attack, right? That it doesn't say specifically melee, right? They both are considered attacks. So strike, just really something you want to keep in mind of, like, is this card that good? Because I'm going to have to play it 1 turn and then make sure I get to attack next turn. So Mauler Fiend, right? Strike, deal 1 damage to all enemies for each Dark Pact on this troop. You got to spend 8 energy to put this thing into play, and then hope that you're not dead. And then, I guess, put a bunch of Dark Pacts on it before you attack. This thing is like going to kill your opponent anyway by itself. This kind of strike trigger just doesn't really matter. So you want to think about, like, this is a good instance of strike, right? Because this card has stealth, meaning it's not going to be targeted. It's a very low chance that Death Leaper is going to die. And then you're definitely hitting for 7, right? This thing hits like a truck. And then you get that strike trigger of stunning a random enemy, which is great. You know, it's a very well designed card because it's going to make it harder to get rid of Death Leaper. And then you can get maybe multiple attacks going, and that gets really scary. And you're going to be dead by this Death Leaper very, very soon. So that is what strike does. Stun, we actually looked at some cards with stun, right? Okay, we'll just do Death Leaper. Stun. A stunned unit cannot attack during its next turn. So think about it this way, right? You hit that thing. Let's say you hit that Warlord. That Warlord cannot attack you for that active turn right after you've stunned, right? So it's quite powerful because obviously when you start to gain more board presence, if you're stunning things that are, you know, on the board to clear your units, you're just getting more and more advantage. That's why Psychomancer in particular, scary card. It doesn't hit Warlords, right? But it does hit enemy troops, and you can trigger Artifice multiple times. So you can potentially get X amount of stuns in one turn, right? Where essentially their board doesn't matter. And that's a pretty scary thing. Stun can be a very, very powerful keyword. Oh my goodness. We are down to the last few. All right, talent. There are obviously plenty of cards that have talent, but let's show chaos in them. Talent is create a card in your hand at the start of your turn. Now, this happens with every Warlord, right? But also it happens with something like Master of Possession, which gives you Rights of the Possession, which is a very unique spell, right? He's doing some crazy stuff in the background. But then if you look at like Monolith, you're going to get Talent Particle Whip, right? So you got to look at the card. I also love that in the display, when you see this, you see the second card to know how to click on it. So Particle Whip, going to deal 8 damage to an enemy and 3 to its adjacent units. So, you should be looking at cards that have talent as basically having a poster on their face of kill me now, or I'm getting permanent card advantage, right? Because talent actually happens every single turn. So you want to be really, really mindful of, letting something like, I don't know, what's a good... I definitely see Witchblade Warlock played a bunch. Yeah, get Witchfire, 2 energy, deal 1 to 3 damage, and then you get to repeat that effect if they've got some Spirit Stones. You probably want to get this thing off the board because it's just going to give them another free card. Some really, really great card advantage. So talent is definitely something to be really careful about just getting rid of. Tide is going to be in both Orc and Necrons. Let's actually look at an Orc. Got the Hornhelms boys here. So Tide 2. When this card is played from your hand, you can play it again up to X times. So Tide 2 means essentially on turn 9, you can play 3 boys, right? Itself and its 2 copies, which will come to your hand. But those copies go away at the end of turn. So essentially you're either playing this on 3 by itself, which I would not recommend because the card's not that good. 6, where you get 2 copies, or on 9 energy, you're going to get 3 total Hornhelm boys. Von Ryan's Leaper Tide 1, obviously a little bit simpler. You're getting 1 copy. That's it. Right? So Tide is an interesting one. Obviously, it's more either go wide in the case of Orcs or go tall in the case of Tyranids. All right, probably one of the most important keywords in the game, Vanguard. Your other units cannot be targeted with attacks. This has to be beaten down first. So Vanguard is essentially the shield for your Warlord, shield for your other units. I believe there is an exact replica of this for Hearthstone. God. And then there was Frontline for HHL, I believe, for Horus Heresy Legions. What was the one for Hearthstone? Like Pariah or something? Like something had to be targeted first. Can't remember, but you get the gist of it. Vanguard is definitely going to put a bump on a card when you're evaluating it. Obviously, something that's smaller is going to be easy to clear, so Vanguard doesn't matter too much on Triarch Praetorian because it's not that hard to get rid of. But We looked at Lich Guard earlier. If you look at Tyrant Guard 2, it's got armor as well, but you have to get rid of this thing first to start hitting your opponent and really, taking control of the board. So Vanguard units can have a very, very high impact on combat and in the pace of the game. And you'll see how annoying they are if you haven't already. And Vanguard is something you should probably make sure gets into your deck, because Vanguard on a key turn, when you just need a little bit of cushion, a little bit of protection for your Warlord, it's perfectly, it is the best way to do that, besides healing and stuff like that. All right, last one. And I think we only have an instance for Bringer of Decay and Curse of the Pharaon, right? Yeah. So Vulnerable 1, obviously when they have numbers, you kind of know what they do. But this says, when this unit is damaged, it receives an additional 1 damage, right? So it's the opposite of armor, right? You're tacking on a modifier of damage rather than reducing something by a modifier. So Bringer of Decay, giving every single unit, right, enemies have, all enemies get Vulnerable 1. That is pretty scary. So you want to get rid of Bringer of Decay pretty dang quick. Curse of Pharaon you can't do anything about, but they actually nerfed it from 5 down to 3. Because I think it was at 5, then it was a 4 in beta, now it's at 3. And you can see why. Giving Vulnerable 3 to all enemy troops, that means a 1 damage attack is dealing 4 damage to a unit, right? So anything past Vulnerable 1 is going to enable a deck to basically play any sort of unit and be able to clear what they have. So we've only got 2 cards that actually reference Vulnerable right now, but I imagine we're probably going to see more of that in the future. And if I check my notes, that is every keyword. So that's quite a lot. What is it? It's 16 general ones, because I forgot regeneration, or 15, because I also put choose in there. And then regeneration is actually specific to Necrons. Sorry, I missed that. Obviously makes sense for their lore. And then each faction has an obviously minimum 1, but potentially up to 3 or 4. And then you've got card types, and you've got just the wording on choose. You've also got ephemeral. What's nice about this is it feels a lot easier to pick up, because all of them are kind of self-explanatory. But I wanted to go over it because there is quite a lot to digest when you look at the keywords. And I know for me, that can sometimes be a turnoff. I'll be real about that. Like when I see a bunch of new keywords from Magic the Gathering, it kind of just doesn't piss me off. But I'm not happy about it, because it just means I have to kind of keep track of more variables. Whereas I would rather they all kind of be reduced into, well, not all, but comes into play, when this dies, when you play a spell, when you do this. So there's a lot of layers to this, but I promise it sounds a little bit more expansive than it really is. When you get into games, whether you're drafting, playing practice mode, or you're playing unranked or ranked, you pick it up pretty quick. There are a lot of keywords you see show up quite often, and then the ones vulnerable that you might not see all that much, you don't have to remember that too much, right? But for specific matchups, maybe it'll be helpful to have. So that's what I got for you today, folks. I'm excited to get this video out. I know people were asking about it. So feel free to leave any comments if there's anything you felt like I left out or didn't explain well enough. Obviously, always trying to improve on this channel for you guys. So thanks for reaching out as always. And trying to think of what else we got coming up. We're going to have some draft videos. We're going to have some gameplay videos, definitely with Space Marines and Eldar. But we'll have other gameplay videos for draft, because I'll probably be playing multiple factions for that. So I'm looking forward to bring much more Warpforge content to you guys now that I've had a little bit of break in coming back to the channel. So as always, I will catch you next time. Thanks so much.